How are y'all doing today? Let me open us with a word of prayer. Father, I thank you for this day, and I thank you for what you've given me and how I can come out here and open my heart of what's going on in my life. And I thank you for the blessings. I thank you for each man here, and that I may touch something in their heart. And I just pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. I'd like to thank Kyle and all of the Midland Marketplace. Is this too loud? Is this okay? Fine? Okay. It's going to bug me. It's right in my face. Midland Marketplace people that are here. And I want to spend some time telling you about my family and our company. And most importantly, talk about my walk with Jesus Christ. And talk about the people that are important to me and that are in my family. Today with me is I have two of the third generation of Tauber Oil Company. My son David Tauber there and Jonathan Tauber. I have Tommy Shinowski. I'm going to murder it. I never do it. Tommy works at Midstream Projects for Tauber Oil Company. And my prayer partner since 1990, Al Butler, the old looking man over there. I'm married to Linda, as Kyle said. I have two daughters from my first marriage, Amy and Laurie, and then Linda and I have David and Rebecca. And let me first start off and tell you Rebecca's favorite verse. It's Jeremiah 29:11. For I know I have the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not calamity, that to give you a future and a hope. And I'm sure all of you have ever probably heard, most of you have heard that. It's Jeremiah. But let me say it one more time. For I know that I have the plans for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and calamity, to give you a future and a hope. My question today is, do you know God's plan for your life? God has a plan for each of us, unbeknownst to us, me early in my life. And I'm going to share how he showed that to me. And my life experiences have played a very big part in determining who I am and my relationship with Jesus Christ that now defines me and gives me a purpose in my life. A large part of my life is spent at Tauber Oil Company. It's been really what my family's always been about. And so let me start off telling you about a 8th grade dropout who formed a company, and which now we have a multi-million-dollar diversified oil company. My dad, when he was 6 years old, lost his father, and he had two younger brothers and sisters. You think I'm going to need that? You're too strong. Anyway, he got shipped off at 6 years old to live with some relatives up in Louisiana. Now, you think about it. At 6 years old, you just lost your dad. Your mother ships me off to relatives. You can either be real shy or you can be a pretty tough kid. Dad was a pretty tough kid. He came back to Houston, and he went to school through about the 8th grade, and he dropped out of school and said, he went to work to try to help his mother survive through it all. And 8th grade education, he first thing he did was he worked, if you're familiar with Houston, he worked at River Oaks Country Club as a caddy. And then he graduated from there and went to work at the Lamar Hotel, which at that time was the oil place. That's where all the oil people met for lunch, and deals were done there. It was a big happening place. And somewhere at that point in time, Dad must have met somebody and said, Tauber, you need to go work for the Southern Pacific Railroad. You'll learn how to get in the oil business. So he did that, and they also said you can be an engineer or you can be a traffic manager. Well, he became a traffic manager. Learned it pretty well. Next thing you know, a small refinery on the Houston Ship Channel hired him. And he went to work for them, scheduling rail cars, and then he learned the barging and the shipping and the pipeline industry, and was doing a pretty good job there. Now let me back up and give a little romance. Now none of us can probably picture this, but whenever this was, probably in the early late 30s, early 40s. I'm sorry, I can't tell you when my parents got married. Dad's at a bus stop waiting on a bus, and here comes this pretty little brunette. And that's how my parents met. And he would meet her every day at the bus. And that was their dates at that point in time, because he didn't have a car. So 4 kids later and 12 grandchildren, that's my father's romantic story. Going back to his career, he worked for the Southern Pacific Railroad, and then this small refinery on the Eastern Ship Channel called Eastern States Refining, which is still there today. It's Valero Houston. Hired him, and he initially was a traffic manager. He worked his way up where he was, like I said, doing the barging and shipping, and finally the president of the company asked him to come work for him, and he started selling the petroleum products. So he would call Exxon and say, hey, I've got diesel and gasoline. Well, Exxon said, well, we'll buy your diesel, but we got plenty of gasoline. Shell was just the opposite. Mobil was somebody different, something different. And you just go down the line, Marathon, all the different refiners, everybody had different requirements. They were not talking to each other because of antitrust. And Dad saw there was a niche there. So in 1949, he had a guy that financed him. They did a partnership, and Dad became a one-man marketer. He would buy, take title. I'm sure it was trucks and rail cars at first to customers, and he had a little niche there. So in 1953, he formed his own company, got financing down from a bank in downtown Houston, and Tauber Oil Company was off and running. Dad didn't have much of a father image, so it was all the tough men that he came across. That was his father image. So it made him a tough person, but he also was very fair and very loving. In 1967, he incorporated. Now, this is always the thing. Richard and I always talk about this. Him and Mom got all 50% of the company, and they got all the voting stock, and the kids got the non-voting stock. But I always look up and say, thank you for the non-voting stock, because, it was worth something to us. At the time, it didn't mean anything to us, but it was worth something to us. My dad, when I went to work in 1971, I realized that my dad liked to do deals. I mean, he did everything from fuel oil cargoes from Mexico into the utilities in Florida. He did trucks of molten sulfur. He did trucks of wood treating oil. You name it, if there was a buck to be made, my dad tried to make it. And but he was always very cognizant of what the majors thought of him and what people thought of him. He was, because his lifeblood was the majors and the independent refiners. So this also was an impact on all of us, the kids, because we were always concerned what people thought of us, So 2 important things when I went to work in 1971 for my dad. He took me in his office and said, we do 2 things around here. I said, okay. He said, we pay our bills and we do what we say we're going to do. Now, I'm this smart aleck college degree kid, and I'm saying, well, that's not very smart. Dad, everybody does that. Well, it didn't take me long in the oil business to realize, nah, not everybody pays their bills. Not everybody does what they say they're going to do. But, I had to learn that for myself. But I spent the first 2 years working for my father in transportation. I learned everything you could about barges, rail cars, trucks, pipelines, even ships. And I had a really 2-year, really good education, because that's 71. In the late 73, I went skiing. I came back in like January 74. And, back then, there are a lot of older people in here. I figured there might be some younger people. But back then, there wasn't computers at your desk. There wasn't cell phones. There wasn't fax emails and all that. You had to do it. I'm sure a few of you have read reading files. We had a reading file. That's where all the information that went on yesterday in the company, that's where it all happened. And so that's where you got your information. So if we'd done a deal, I'd have to look for the purchase and the sale in this reading file, and I'd fill out a form for transportation. I'd call an inspection company. I'd do all this work. Well, it was kind of funny there. I went through this file, and here's these 2 contracts for basically cargoes of diesel fuel coming from Europe. So I looked through the reading file. There's no sales. Dad's business was no risk. You bought and sold at the same time. So I went and asked the guy I was working for, I said, where are the contracts? He says, oh, we haven't sold them yet. I went, really? He says, well, let me just tell you, this was early 73. You know, there's talk about an oil embargo, and the major oil companies are short a little bit of crude. They're short diesel fuel and gasoline. So what they did is they decided we're going to cut off some of the people that are our toughest customers. That happened to be the railroads. No offense to any railroad people that might be in here. And they were telling Dad, we're going to send you some customers. If you get some diesel from overseas and you can supply it, we'll send you these customers and you can sell it. Well, that's what we had done. And Dad brought these cargoes into the East Coast, traded them, back down with a refiner, one of the major oil companies, back to the Gulf Coast. And we sent them up the pipelines. You know, out of Houston, you can go up Explorer, Magellan, and Texas Eastern, up the pipelines. And we sold the railroads at all these podunk places. I mean, the one thing that sticks in my mind is West Little Rock, Arkansas. Because about a week after we'd done the deal and we started making deliveries, I'd set up the trucks. And I walk in on a Monday morning, and Dad's talking to a Mr. Money who's in San Francisco. Now, it's 8:15, 6:15 in San Francisco. Mr. Money is chewing my dad out because he only got 4 of the 5 trucks of that 19-cent expensive diesel that we had sold him. And so he is just all over Dad. And so I made an effort from then on that I had a backup truck driver. If I didn't get 4 trucks, I'd get that 5th one from somebody else. We never had that problem again. But we continue to sell railroads all over the United States for the next couple of years doing that. You know, in the summer of 73, it was my turn to get out of transportation and start getting in the marketing business. And so there was, Dad had probably 3 or 4 other marketers working with him besides my older brother Jerry. And there was a man named Archie Alt who was probably in his mid-70s at this time, but he was a prince of a man. He'd worked for a small refinery in East Texas called Longview Refining. And Mr. Alt took me under his wing and took me all over the East Coast and the mid-continent and introduced me to all the different refiners and companies that we would deal with or had dealt with about fuel oil. That was what part of the business I was going to get into. He worked my tail off. And then later on that summer, I finally made a sale to a utility. Well, it was a buying group for Entergy, which was a combination of Louisiana, Mississippi, New Orleans Public Service, Arkansas Power and Light. They had a buying group for them, and they were buying millions of barrels of fuel oil every month to be burned. So I was lucky enough to sell just 2 barges to a man that was leaving that company and going somewhere else. And he said, come over here next week and meet the new man that's going to be there. So I go over the next week, and there's this man. I walk in his office. He's got glasses. He's smoking a corn cob pipe, and he's sweating profusely. His name was U.E. Mathis. He had been a wire salesman for Louisiana Power and Light. He'd been moved in this job, knew nothing about oil, knew nothing about fuel oil. He looks at me and said, you're pretty young. I said, yes, sir, I'm 23. He says, is this a good deal? I said, yes, sir. He said, if it isn't a good deal, I'll never do another deal with you again. I said, I have my whole career in front of me. This is a good deal. And he agreed with me, and we became very, very good friends. And even to the point when he had something offered to him by somebody else, he would call and say, Tauber, is this a good deal? I said, yes, sir, it is. And we hunted, we fished, we played golf. He always kidded me about being a rich kid, and because he had very humble upbringings, and he thought just because I was in the business, I was a rich kid. Anyway, Mr. Mathis was one of those type of men that was a very good friend and was instrumental in my growing up because I was dealing with people like him all the time. I found out that reputation, what Dad had said, do what you say you're going to do. There it is. There was one thing right there. The next thing, there was a man at Exxon, and back then, this guy was really smart. I would call him and offer him fuel oil, and it was like he didn't have the time to deal with me. No, I don't need that. No, I don't need that oil in New York Harbor. No, I don't need that. So I really got perturbed. I decided I'm going to do a deal with this guy if it kills me. And so I would call him every day, and I'd offer him something every day. And this went on for 4 or 5 months. And finally, I just, I'd given up. But I called, and I offered him some 3/10 low sulfur fuel oil in New York Harbor. And he stopped. He says, "What's the price?" And I gave him a price. He says, "I think I can use that." "Really?" He said, "Let me call you back." The next phone call was a broker in New York Harbor, and he says, "You still got that 3/10 low sulfur in New York Harbor?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Can you go firm for 30 minutes?" I said, "Yes, sir." So I'll make him a firm offer. In the interim, Mr. Exxon calls back and says, "I'll buy that." And I went, I can't sell it. I just offered it firm to somebody else. That's the key, because the people I offered it firm bought it. And I didn't do a deal with Exxon. But my ethics, it'd been easy for me to say, "Yeah, you can have it." And I'd deal with the people that had offered firm and pull the offer. But that wasn't ethical. And, once again, my ethics helped me make a point with this man, and we became good friends. I sold him oil the next day. And we played golf. We did a lot of things together. And he eventually came to work for Tauber Oil Company as my boss. And him knowing the Exxon system, we've got $2.80 natural gas now. Back then, natural gas was $15 an MMBTU. So all utilities burn fuel oil. And so Exxon and Ambrata Hess and Shell sold fuel oil up and down the East Coast. And he knew this system. And he knew Exxon's system coming out of the Caribbean to supply this. So we could make Exxon money by delivering oil to their customers and them giving us back somewhere else. And we did very well from 74 to 79 just doing that. He helped me learn the business even more from what I knew. Once again, relationships is what helped both of us. In 1977, we were delivering terminals, we were delivering to utilities, and I saw that the East Coast, all along from Florida up, there were terminals everywhere. And Tauber, Dad didn't invest in anything like that because he didn't want to, do anything that would affect the majors. Well, there was a young man that came to see me about selling diesel in Houston Harbor. And he was doing it over in Louisiana, and he wanted to come to Houston and sell diesel and bunker fuels and lube oils to ships in the Houston Harbor. And I thought it was an excellent idea to get a business going. And my dad didn't think it was. He says, "I see deals like that all the time." He says, "I don't want to do that." I said, "Well, do you mind if I do?" He said, "It's your money. If you want to do that, you go right ahead." Now, when your wife says yes, but she means no? Should have realized that. Well, that was 1977. We went about 7 or 8 months before we made a little money, and then we rocked along till 1979. And in 1979, I decided it was time for me to do something on my own, be a little bit black sheep. So I left Tauber Oil Company in 1979. My dad was not very happy about it, but he soon forgave me about that. But that's about that. That's I look back at leaving the family company, coming back. Those were always tough times when you do stuff like that. Now let me back up here and tell you a little bit about growing up. I grew up in the Episcopal Church. I was very active. I sang in the choir. I was an acolyte. I was very active in high school ministries. Went off to college and kind of backslid like some of us do. When I met my first wife in college, we dated all the way through college. She was going to a Roman Catholic church, and I used to go with her to a cathedral in downtown Fort Worth that's still there. If you ever want to see a pretty little cathedral, go see it. And that's what we did. And when we graduated, we got married. It was more out of convenience. We dated all the way through college, and that's what you did back then, I guess. Sometimes I question what I did, but but it ended up in a divorce when in 1979, right after I left the company, she walked in one day and says, I think we need to separate and work on the marriage. So we worked on the marriage. I did, for sure. But it ended up in divorce, and at that point, I realized the most important thing were the two little girls I had, Amy and Lori. So, started a new part of my life, the marine company was doing very well, and and I had a friend that was working in Beaumont, and I would call over there and talk to him. He had a secretary named Linda Snodgrass. One day he says, you should come over here and meet her. I said, I should? He said, yes, you should. So I go over, just take him to lunch. I meet Linda Snodgrass. I saw that she was very attractive, and we talked. And the next day I called back over there. I said, Linda, is Dave in? She said, yeah. I said, well, before you get him, can we go out sometime if you're over here in Houston? Let me get Dave for you. Puts me on hold. This goes on for 6 months, folks. Every time I called, I asked her out. She'd put me on hold. Now, she'll tell you that the Holy Spirit said, don't say no to that guy. Because Linda had become a Christian at 8 years old. So finally, one Friday or one day in the middle of the week, I call over there and Linda, when are we going to go out? How about this weekend? Well, I dropped the phone. I'm in shock. So we went out, we started dating. It was at first it was, I think it was a month later we went out, and that's when that was my deal. If I went out with somebody, the next date I would introduce to my daughters. So we went out, had an all-day Saturday event. We went to a crawfish party, went to an art festival, went to an Astros game. We covered all the bases. And we had a good time. And so we kept dating. That summer I proposed. And now here's the interesting thing. Linda had asked me, are you a Christian? Yeah, I'm a Christian. Nobody asked me about my personal relationship. So we go for the marriage interview with a pastor in Port Arthur, Texas, where we were getting married. Now, she'll tell you she's from Amarillo. So just leave it there. She doesn't think she's from Port Arthur. But the pastor said, are you Christian? I said, yes, sir. Never asked me anything. And so we get married in January of 83. We visit, I got to give the plug, Second Baptist Church in Houston. And we visit the whole year of 83 there. And I'm sitting there in church watching our pastor preach. And I'm turning around, and I'm almost in the back row, but who's telling him these stories about me? I mean, every sermon hit me in the face with something that I was doing wrong or I was guilty of. And no, it's the Holy Spirit, but that's what was going on. Linda realized during that year that I wasn't a Christian. I'll have to be really honest with you. One time we got in an argument. She goes running upstairs. I follow her up there, and she's reading the Bible. And I look at her and says, what's that going to do for our marriage? Lost. That's what that meant. So in late 83, I got real smart. As she says, I thought I was God's gift to the oil business. I went long heating oil futures in the commodities market. Don't ever play with commodities if you don't have to. We were up $1 million when we went to a convention in London. And by the time we got back, we were down almost that $1 million because we kept thinking it was going to turn around and go back up. You know how the oil price is. It's always going to turn around and come back up, right? So took a big hit, stopped out. Company's a little cash strapped at this point. I don't think I'm real smart. Feel I'm pretty down. And I get that sermon again that just hits me in the face. Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? And I look at Linda. I says, you want to join the church? She looks at me, and I don't think she walked. I think she floated as we went down the aisle because she knew this was a wonderful time in my life. So I made a profession of faith as Jesus Christ turned over my life. And it was, folks, there wasn't any fireworks, there wasn't any light, but there was relief. Because the way it was explained to me, I felt comfortable about what decision I'd made, and I realized I didn't need to worry about what the major oil companies thought or what y'all thought or anything. I had to be cognizant of what Jesus Christ thought. And that was a new thing for me. And, I'm gonna read Matthew 6:25. Most of you've seen it. For this reason I say to you, do not worry about your life as to what you will eat or what you will drink, nor for your body as to what you will put on. It is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing. Look at the birds of the air, that they do not sow, they don't reap, they don't gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father takes care of them. Are you worth more than they are? And who of you, by being worried, can add a single hour to your life? I quit worrying. Now that's still, I'm in a hole at business. We've lost a bunch of money, but I'm at comfort that somehow this is going to work through this, and the Lord's going to direct me. And it was an interesting time. It wasn't long after I think this was early February when we joined the church, and it wasn't long after that we get invited. We had the opportunity to go to a dinner, and I thought it was a new members dinner, but it was really the opportunity to be involved in the church and their building campaign. Well, I sat there and listened to the story, and it was a 3-year building campaign. This is the first one. There's been numerous ones since then, but this is the first one. And I listened to the story, and I looked at Linda, and she looked at me and said, whatever you want to do. And I said, I'm still a little bit into Well, I should be able to do something over a 3-year period. So I made a pledge and left there, didn't think much of it. I figured I got time to do this, and wasn't long after that my accountant called and said, hey, you're going to get a tax return. Well, I lost some money, I should get a tax return. And then he calls back and says, I made a mistake. And I went, oh no, I don't get a tax return. He says, no, it's double. Double? Well, that was a third of the pledge. And then the next Sunday, it's pledge the budget time. I've never tithed in my life, but I'm being faithful. So I write a 10% number of my gross salary. And then about a month later, I get a letter from a guy named Gary Levering, who 10 years before that, I had invested in some apartments in Houston on the west side. And the letter says, we've been offered the highest number per door for apartments that I can ever remember in the city of Houston. And we're going to take the offer. Well, that finished the rest of the pledge plus some, folks. So the Lord's got me. He's hooked me. I know that I financially have to be faithful. And in the interim, we've joined a Sunday school class. We've started a discipleship class called Master Life. And we've, in that fall of 84, I started a 5-year program in Bible Study Fellowship. So I had a real strong growth program going on in my study of the Bible and to know the Lord better. In 1980, later on that year in 84, my father came up with the idea that he'd had enough of the New York Merc and the way it was reacting, the markets. He didn't feel that the oil business was the same, and he wanted to do a tax-free spinoff, and that meant him and Mom took their 50% of the company. It left the 4 kids with 50%. My sister took her money and went south, and it left the company, a new Tauber oil company, as my 3 brothers. We worked together from 1984 to 1998 when my older brother walked in and looked at Richard and I and said, I'm going to retire. And he was 60 years old. I think he was 60 years old. I think that's about right. Jonathan looks at me like I'm crazy. And he retired. We bought him out. And we were very fortunate at that time because the oil refining market, we went from having very low margins in the refining market at that point, and in 98 it turned. And we were poised at the right time to trade a lot of products that were very profitable for us at the time, especially petrochemicals and naphthas and carbon black feedstock. But the main thing that Richard and I did, which is the problem the 3 brothers we probably had, was we didn't communicate really well. Well, Richard and I were the last two at home, and we were able to set up some new practices. We communicate every day. We made two good executive decisions. Richard does the details, and I do the bottom line. And we work you can ask anybody at Tauber Oil Company who's running around checking all the details, and that's Richard. And it's worked very well from us. It's kept us out of trouble. It's kept us from taking any large losses anywhere, any shape, in any of the markets we're in. We've also been able to set up a state-of-the-art accounting, which is deal capture, so it goes through the whole system from contracts to accounting to risk to credit. Once you put one deal in there, and it works very well for us. I'll go through this real. How am I doing on time, Kyle? Fine, he says. Okay. we deal in, I'll give you some heads up on some of the main things we do. We deal in petrochemical products, toluene, xylene, benzene, methanol. A lot of those all go into downhole chemicals out here. And we ship a lot of trucks and rail out here to jobbers that supply this market. We supply carbon black feedstock to carbon black plants. There's one in Big Spring, there's two at Borger, but we collect this all on the Gulf Coast in tanks in Houston and New Orleans, and we export it to plants in South Africa, Europe, India, Indonesia, and Korea. We're the largest exporter of carbon black in the United States. We also sell diesel. Some of the diesel out here is coming off the rack at Odessa, and we supply diesel off that rack. We also supply diesel in Vegas and Phoenix, and we also supply it along the colonial and plantation systems in the southeast. We do gasoline and diesel on the west coast. We do NGL products. 7 years ago, we bought a trucking company out here in Abilene called Transoil. You may or may not see our trucks. There's so many trucks out here. But we are first purchasers, and we've expanded from Abilene out here into the Permian. We have a yard over by the airport, and we also go all the way up into Oklahoma and North Texas and Oklahoma with along Centurion Pipeline and with LAC units over there. Another purchase that we bought 5 years ago is a company called Intercon. It's a natural gas company that sells to end users. It's a very low-risk business. We sell to everything from hospitals to colleges to restaurants to grocery stores to Foxy Lady cleaners one time. So, I mentioned Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare, not calamity, to give you a future and a hope. Well, I guess the biggest challenge the Lord had for me in my life was my youngest daughter, Rebecca, and her cancer, rhabdomyosarcoma. Probably never heard of it. There's only about 1,000 cases diagnosed a year worldwide. And the Lord prepared me for this because as crazy as I was, I would have realized I was going, without knowing Him, I would have tried to take it all on myself. But I knew he was going to be in charge of this, and he directed us to the right doctors at MD Anderson. And we fought a 3.5-year battle with her, and we watched what she calls herself a drama queen fight it and to walk with Christ through it all. It's been 11 years since she died. But we know she's got a mansion in heaven, so Linda and I are very comfortable with that. And I'm sure she's running the place, and I'm sure she's using God's American Express, not mine. So, the day we went to MD Anderson, we were down there, and her girlfriends are calling her on her phone and asking her what's going on, and they all tell her they're gonna skip school and come down to the hospital. And I said, no, we don't want them down here. 16 of them screaming and yelling. I said, go to the house. So they walk in and tell the principal, we don't have excuses, but we're walking out because Rebecca's got cancer. So she let them go. And we get there, and there's 16 girls yelling and crying and jumping up and down. And Rebecca called herself a drama queen just because of these girls. I'll give you a perfect example. Rebecca was, I think it was the first day she took chemo, and we come home and she's laying on a pad upstairs watching TV, feeling horrible. I mean, just it's as bad as it can get. And in walks one of these girls, bebopping upstairs to see Rebecca. Rebecca, you just cannot believe what a horrible day I had today. And Rebecca looks at her, really? And she tells her that senior boy that she has the crush on walked by, didn't look at her, didn't even pay attention to her, sat at another table. Can you believe that, Rebecca? You know, Rebecca's sitting there going, yeah, I guess I can. So, you know, Rebecca, she held her own through this all, and through the chemo and through the surgery, the scars, the radiation, the doctor's appointment. You know, all this was a test for her, but you know, she just did wonderful through it all. And she realized that Jesus Christ had to be first, and she realized that family was more important than anything because we were there for her the whole time. She had a wonderful understanding of life at the age of 18. And I would like to share, I'm hoping somebody's back there to turn the YouTube on. They're walking. There's a YouTube, and hopefully all he has to do is hit that, and the YouTube comes on.
This is Rebecca Tauber, and she wants to share with you what God has been doing in her life. A lot of the teenagers would say, oh boy, this happened. I don't know what I'd do, how I'd stand. Rebecca's moving down. But I think you're going to see that Rebecca at the same time wasn't moving down. She was moving up. And these are her own words that she has written. It's called My Odd Gift. My Odd Gift. Rebecca, share with us what you've written.
After months of tests and surgeries, this diagnosis became reality for me. My greatest fear was that I would lose all my hair. The words of the doctor confirming that realization continued to play over and over in my mind. Little did I realize that the loss of my hair would become such an insignificant concern. I remember the moment so vividly, almost as if it were yesterday. The clothes I wore that day, my long braided hair, the tint of glitter in my makeup, and the tears that filled my daddy's eyes remain in the forefront of my mind today. I had never faced fear like I did that day. Rhabdomyosarcoma, a rare adolescent cancer, was what I would be faced with for the next 2 years of my life. The tunnel I seemed to be put in was black, and I could not see the light at the end. A sophomore in high school at the time, I would have described myself as a typical 16-year-old drama queen. A good day had the elements of straight hair, a high from the upperclassmen I had a crush on, sitting at the lunch table that got the most attention, and no homework or test assigned for the next day. A bad day was characterized by, well, just the opposite. The drama that unfolded each day was as necessary to our group of friends as food and water. If it didn't develop naturally, we would create it. It seemed to sustain us. Despite our natural fallen natures, I was part of a circle of friends I could later compare to a life jacket that gave me the buoyancy I needed to survive as I rode the white-crested rapids of life. My sophomore year also gave me something I had strived for my entire life thus far: freedom and independence for my mother and father. I quickly became a scarce commodity at home. My friends took precedence. Besides, I had already given 16 years to my family. It was time to move on to bigger and better. I am still riding the white-capped rapids of life, but instead of holding on to my life, I am actually enjoying the ride. 8 months ago, upon checking in my last chemo, another tumor was found. I no longer had that drowning sense of fear anymore. I know that God knew what he was doing, and he wasn't finished with me yet. With approximately 3 more months of this treatment left, The light at the end is so overwhelmingly bright. I see a whole new life ahead. I no longer have the need to partake in the daily drama that I thought necessary. In fact, I run the opposite direction. My buoyancy now comes from my Heavenly Father, and my friends are the byproduct of Him. My family has been there every step of the way. I cannot imagine life without them and love being with them now. Oh, and my hair? I'll be anxious for it to grow out, but it has been a luxury not to have to mess with it. I just put on one of my 6 or so different wigs, and away I go. I know that God does not make mistakes, and that as much as I would have never chosen this path to go down, I cannot imagine my life without it. What God has done for me is supernatural. The person I am now is who I want to be. God has blessed me with a journey that began with pain and suffering that has led to peace and joy beyond comprehension. For this I am thankful. In other words, I am thankful for cancer.
You know, just about the time all her friends went off to college, Linda and I decided we'd get her a little townhouse to live in so she could get the benefit of being on her own. And so we went to the north side of Houston to a place that sold furniture, and we're walking in and she announces to us, "I'm not taking any more chemo." You know, a dad, you kind of initially go, "Whoa, you're not going to take any more chemo? What do you mean?" So I'm not going to take any more. I said, "Well, why am I buying furniture?" Then she looks at me, "Dad, I'm going to be healed one way or the other." And then she giggles and says, "I'm just joking with you." Just pulling my leg. She was just picking on me that day. You know, we know she's completely healed. We know she's in heaven. We have that faith and trust in Jesus Christ at this point. And knowing Christ and trusting Him with our lives, you know, there's two things I want to ask you guys, two practical comments I want to leave with you. What you want to keep for yourself is usually what God wants you to give to Him. Think about that. And the second, that which we give to the Lord, He replaces with something more valuable. In Rebecca's case, she's in heaven. No more pain, no more chemo, no more tests, no more radiation. So, you see, God has a plan for each of our lives. It wasn't what we planned for Rebecca, but she has touched lots of people and still does. Linda and I know that one day we will be with her in heaven. And if you want to do this, it's REBEKAH, Tauber, if you ever want to see that on YouTube or show it to a drama queen at home. You know, I do that with a lot of people. They say, "Yeah, there's a lot of drama at my house." I said, "You need to watch this," because it's a real good thing for a teenager to watch that. And I'm done. So